Welcome into the CU Lab with NAFQ Services. In each episode, we join thought leaders who are stirring things up with breaking innovations and insights. The ideas discussed here will help your credit union evolve. We want you to try this at home. So let's get started.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the CU Lab. I'm Randy Salser, president of NAFQ Services. Today I'm sitting down with Jason Cradaville. He's the head of corporate communications and public policy at Centerlink. We're going to talk about electronic consent-based SSN verification, or eCBSV, what it is and how credit unions can use it to onboard new members faster and with less friction. We'll also cover how credit unions can utilize it to help cut back on the synthetic ID fraud. Jason, it's always great speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Randy. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's one of those government acronyms that just rolls right off the tongue, isn't it?
Yeah. So many of them. That's true. All right, so let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about Centerlink and how you got your start in this industry.
Yeah, sure. So Centerlink, you mentioned in your introduction synthetic identity fraud. And just to give you a little bit of our founder story, our two co-founders, Max and Naftali, were back in 2017 working at the online lender Affirm, not to be confused with a firm, but the actual Affirm. And they were running fraud, risk ops, risk decisioning, data science, and they started to see this unique type of fraud that they had not seen before. And what they realized is they were seeing credit identities of people that don't actually exist. And it turns out they were some of the early pioneers seeing synthetic identity fraud. And with that, they looked around the industry, realized that neither Affirm nor anyone else in the industry had any solution or tool to spot it and stop this type of fraud. Yeah. And so they said, you know what, let's do something about that. And so in 2017, they started the company, Centerlink, with, again, an initial mission of tackling synthetic identity fraud. And today, synthetic is certainly one of the key things that we address, along with identity theft, KYC, all of the things that go into knowing that the person applying for a financial product or service is who they say they are. And the way we work, just a real quick overview, we plug in right at that point of onboarding or application. So for example, for NAFQ's members, they get an application, maybe see through an online portal of someone. And, a credit union would connect to us and say, hey, we've got this PII. Is this person who they say they are? We're able to return in real time some scores that tell you, hey, nope, this looks like a synthetic identity, or it looks like an actual person who's been the victim of identity theft. And by the way, here are some insights that can help you improve your KYC and CIP obligations as well. Yeah. So as a company, that's what we do. A little bit about me, and I'll kind of tie that into the topic du jour, eCBSV. Again, as you mentioned, I run public policy and communications for Centerlink. And in a prior life, I actually led the legislative advocacy effort to get Congress to pass the law that led to the creation of this thing called eCBSV. And then shortly after we got that done, I then led a coalition that partnered with the Social Security Administration, because that's where the eCBSV resides, to actually build the system. So we started from a blank piece of paper, sat down with SSA's technical teams, legal teams, privacy teams, and figured out, what is this thing going to look like? We've got this congressional mandate. What does the user base, meaning the financial industry, need from this system, from a performance, from an expectations, all of the different factors that go into a tech build? And then what does SSA need as a government agency to make it all work? Yeah. And so that was a little bit about my background. And interestingly, as an aside, Centerlink was selected as one of the first 10 companies to be in the SSA's pilot program to actually use the system once it went live. And in fact, our CEO, Naftali, was the first human being to ever have their name, date of birth, and social security number run through the eCBSV the day the thing was turned on at SSA. Nice.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a constant battle because the fraudsters are never stopping. They're constantly recreating new things. So let's give a brief description or overview of exactly what eCBSV is.
Sure. So, as more credit unions in the financial industry generally are moving to more digital experiences, whether that's, full, digital only application and onboarding experiences to just lower touch, lower friction experiences, the identity challenge becomes a lot harder because, you think about it organically, you're going to lose that opportunity of a person walking into a credit union branch, sitting down, building that direct personal relationship where you can really ratchet up your confidence that you know who this person is. So as a result, the industry over the last, say, decade or so has been looking for sources of truth for identity information. So what does that mean? Well, let's say you want to verify somebody's income. You can get proxies for that. You can talk to credit bureaus, other things like that, and you can get reasonably close. But if you want to know the truth, where would you go? The Internal Revenue Service, right? Where you file your taxes, whether you're a person, a small business, what have you. So let's say you want to validate someone's social security number. Again, if you want to go to the well, that's the SSA. Right. And so interestingly enough, SSA had been running a system, and I'll bet for many, if not all of the credit unions listening to this, especially those involved in lending, they'll be familiar with a form that gets tucked into a loan application called an SSA 89 form. And that is the paper-based form that a person signs that gives a credit union permission to ask SSA, hey, I've got a name, date of birth, and social, does it match? They'd been operating that system called the eCBSV, so everything you said at the outset minus the E portion, for a few decades. But it was, kind of fee-based system, below the radar, only used by a very limited, mostly in the mortgage industry, to be honest, just because, again, paper-based, kind of slow.
Right.
So, as the industry has moved more digital, it really loses its use cases because it is paper-based, requires a wet signature. Fast forward to 2016, the financial industry, and this is where I mentioned at the outset, with my past experience, said, hey, look, SSA, if you would modernize this system, allow electronic consent, right? Everybody's in the financial industry is very familiar with the e-Sign Act. It's used throughout the banking industry, but also pretty much every other part of the economy that has any sort of an electronic interface involved. Allow electronic consent, you will expand the ability of this system to provide a really important verification beyond just the mortgage industry. It unfortunately, long story short, took an act of Congress to get SSA to do that. But now
literally,
yeah. And so now we have this system. It is a real-time API-based system where a financial institution, oftentimes through a service provider like Centerlink, can say, hey, I've got a name, date of birth, and social. Does this combination match with what SSA has in its master records? And that system, again, it's near real time. You're talking milliseconds in terms of getting back, so it's not going to slow down an application process. That system will respond with one of three answers: yes, no, or deceased. You can obviously guess what that means. Yes means there is a complete match of all three of those pieces of information. No means something was wrong. And deceased means it triggered the death master file and they got an indication that that person is in fact deceased, which itself is a pretty good signal. If you've got an applicant who is deceased, that's probably a red flag. But that's what the system is. It's been operational now for a few years. There's been upwards of about, probably by this point, near 50 million SSN verifications run through it. It started out, like I mentioned, with just a pilot program of 10 institutions. It is now open. Anybody can enroll either directly, which does involve some integration and technical work, or through a service provider. And it is now, wide open. And just from an education and awareness perspective, it's a really great thing to be able to talk to you about it, just to raise awareness that the service does exist.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So what are some of the challenges that credit unions are facing today?
As I think about that question, you think about what is the lifeblood of community-based financial institutions, right? It's having a strong, solid deposit base that allows you to make loans in your community and serve your field and membership. And you look at the changing demographics. I mean, if a credit union wants to grow their membership base, they've got to get more digital. And like I said, the more digital you get, it gets a little trickier to verify someone's identity because you're going to be relying on technology and other proxies as opposed to that direct interpersonal relationship. And if you want to grow your membership base and you want to grow that with confidence that you're onboarding legitimate people who aren't, either fake synthetic identities or identity thieves, it's important to figure out how to integrate technology into that process. And that's where a tool like eCBSV can be so handy because like I said, it's not going to slow things down. It's not going to add friction to the experience, right? I mean, any of the technologists listening will understand if this is adding friction, anything that will increase abandonment rates is like a non-starter.
Yeah.
And our experience is, yes, there are some requirements, some regulatory requirements, consent language that does need to be presented to a consumer that I'll get to later. But none of it seems to be having any sort of a negative effect on the user experience, which is very important when you're trying to build out a digital presence.
Yeah, for sure. And it certainly seems to be, it's not a huge hurdle to be more efficient than the old school paper, system that we've had for 50 years plus. So with challenges, what are some of the opportunities that eCBSV brings to our institutions?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the biggest opportunity is just it taps into that source of truth. And, historically, if you're not doing it the paper way with the SSA 89 form, if you've just been relying on, like I said, proxies, you're getting close, right? But you never fully have that certainty. Yeah. So now, I mean, think about it. You've got an application. You don't have the opportunity to sit across from that person to know if they are who they say they are. And to be able to very quickly find out if that name, date of birth, and social correspond to a real person. That's a very, very important signal, right? Because it's very easy to create a synthetic identity. And that was really the motivation that got Congress to actually do something. I know that's remarkable for those of you who follow the public policy situation in DC, but Congress actually said, this makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Right.
The ability to give this tool and this knowledge to the financial industry, to credit unions, it was a no-brainer. So it was a very bipartisan process. And so, I would say that is arguably the biggest advantage that you can get from something like eCBSV. I will caveat that, though. Not a silver bullet. Right. I think folks understand that there is no magic silver bullet for identity. So whether you're trying to improve your KYC commitments, whether you're trying to just, cut back on fraud, minimize losses, it's a very valuable tool, but it is just one tool in a chief risk officer's toolkit, but it's a very valuable one.
Yeah, sounds like an integral piece though as well. So what are some of the characteristics you're seeing of the credit unions that are using eCBSV or financial institutions overall?
Yeah, so our company, we work with a very, very broad cross-section of the industry. I mean, from regulated banks and credit unions, large and small, many, many fintech lenders as well, who see the value in plugging this system and this functionality into their onboarding process. For credit unions in particular, I'll be honest with you, I've been amazed at my time with the company. Credit unions are extraordinarily interested in this. More so, just to be honest, right? No one's listening to this, right? So I can be perfectly honest. Than some of their cohorts in the other type of small community-based financial institution space. The outreach we've gotten from credit unions of all shapes and sizes, right? I mean, from the very largest to the smallest, has been really, really remarkable. So there's very clearly, and a very impressive level of awareness of the need for this sort of a capability to add into their risk mitigation tools.
Sure. Well, and trust is a huge factor in this.
Right.
And credit unions have always traded on that mantra. They really care about their members, and their members' information is incredibly valuable. So how do the institutions use eCBSV to prevent fraud?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the use, how do you do it, right? How do you take advantage of it? If I can just maybe restate that a little bit differently. There are a few ways to do it. As I mentioned, the preponderance of users of the system, not just with Centerlink, obviously, but just globally, are doing it through a service provider. Mm-hmm. And the law that created eCBSV said that that's a permissible way to do it. But there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, you need to ask yourself as a credit union, are you able, for example, to make an API call in-house? Do you have the ability to do that? I have to say, I would guess that the majority of the respondents would say probably not. Yeah. Even the most technologically sophisticated credit unions I've talked with say, well, we rely on our core provider or some sort of a technology integrator to provide that API connectivity to fill in the blank vendors out there, whether it's Centerlink or somebody else. If you can do the API call in-house, that makes things a lot easier for you, but in no way is that a requirement in order to use eCBSV. So if you have then a core provider or an integrator who is aware of and already working with a service provider to provide that connectivity to the Social Security Administration, you're in good shape. And that's the way you make it happen.
Gotcha.
But you have to know about it. You have to see where it makes sense to fit that into your onboarding flow, top of funnel, bottom of funnel. How are we going to work this strategically? And then it's just getting the right mix of vendors to flip the switch and turn it on for you. And then you're ready to go.
Gotcha. So we do this a lot on our podcast. For folks that are interested, what do we do first? How do we start?
Yeah, I think, one of the let me answer that first by saying what you shouldn't do. And that is don't assume that you know exactly what you're going to fix with eCBSV. One of the things that we've noticed as we work with partners who say, hey, what is this thing? How can it help us? Is synthetic identity fraud, which really was the real reason that eCBSV was created, is stopping that type of fraud. It's still very often missed and very hard to see when you have synthetic identities already on your books. So if you think, well, if I'm just going to plug this thing in, I'm just going to immediately stop all of this fraud, that's probably the wrong way to do it. And like I said, it needs to be seen as one valuable tool in a broader toolkit.
Right.
And so what you do is you have to first say, okay, what is our current mix? How do we interact with potential members, right? If there is a push to digital, you should absolutely be thinking about eCBSV. And if you're a credit union who is going down that increasingly digital path, trying to reach the millennials who don't want to come in and interact, or just an expanding field of membership where they may not be near a physical branch location, digital's got to be in your future. Okay, so what do you do about that? If that is the situation that you find yourself in, that's when you start to need to look at something like eCBSV as a very viable option and frankly a necessity for you. So that's where you start. Then it's figuring out, are my vendors able to do this for me?
Yeah.
And it's not everybody right now. I think there are, so within SSA, and to access eCBSV, you can either build a direct connection to the Social Security Administration. I don't really recommend that. That is, you have to have a tremendous amount of resources. We did it. A number of other service providers do it. But frankly, SSA has designed the system to try to funnel 10,000 financial institutions instead of all building bespoke API connections to the agency. Probably not a great plan for anybody involved. So they've tried to encourage the system such that service providers are really the gateways where the preponderance of institutions will connect. So you got to figure out, do you have that right mix of vendors and service providers who can actually provide you the connectivity? Don't quote me on this number, but I think it's only a few dozen right now companies are directly enrolled with SSA. And by that I mean they have integrated directly with the agency to build that connection. On the other hand, there are hundreds of financial institutions on the other side of those handful of service providers. And that's really where SSA wants the system to evolve as more and more FIs begin to explore using the system.
Gotcha. So what are some educational resources that you can share with credit unions that want to learn about eCBSV?
Yeah, so two things I point you to. Selfishly, I'm going to refer you to things that we've done. We very recently released a new white paper focused on eCBSV, really just an overview. What is it? How do you use it? What are the legal requirements that go along with using it? Because there are some, and I'll touch on this in the second part of my answer. So I'd encourage you to check that out on our website under our white paper section. The second thing is, and this tends to be the most difficult part of utilizing eCBSV, and that is managing the consent language that has to be presented to a consumer. So on the one hand, it's not a piece of paper. On the other hand, it's the government, so of course they're going to give you some red tape, right? And SSA has some very, very specific requirements in terms of, even in a digital onboarding process, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a website, they still provide some very, very specific instructions for what has to be shown to the consumer. Also on our website, we have a very, very detailed guide to how consent must look. So those are really the two resources. Yeah. And that's important, right? I mean, for credit unions.
Disclosure language.
Yeah, for credit unions worried about user experience, it's important to factor in that you're going to have to change and you're going to have to find room in your mobile flow for this extra paragraph and an extra checkbox. It doesn't sound like much, but we've worked with partners for whom it is a bit of a headache. Yeah. But it's those are the two things that I would say to get started with. Check out our white paper and then understand the consent requirements. And I think, like I mentioned, the benefits clearly outweigh the costs. And the costs, we're not talking there is a fee to use the system, but the benefits you get from the corresponding fraud mitigation is tremendous.
Yeah, it seems to far outweigh it. Yeah. Well, Jason, it's been an eye-opening conversation for me personally today. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing some of the benefits of eCBSV with our credit unions.
Thanks, Randy. Pleased to be here.
And thanks to everyone listening. If you're interested in learning more about Centerlink and eCBSV, check out our resources at www.nafq.org/Centerlink. Have a great day, everyone.